Today, I will tell you a story about highs and lows, clutches and chokes, a story about how every little detail, every little decision in and outside a game of StarCraft 2 can change everything, at least for me. This is the story of how I almost won my first ever international premier StarCraft 2 tournament. Enjoy. The tournament I'm referring to is called NEXT. NEXT stands for the NetEase Esports X Tournament. It's organized by the Chinese company NetEase, which is an internet technology company, and they host a bunch of different tournaments for a bunch of different games. Their StarCraft 2 tournament consists of a round of 16 group stage that leads to a top 8 playoff single elimination bracket. It's a tournament open to all players, which means it has open qualifiers divided into different server qualifiers. In this case, it has 7 slots for Korea server qualifiers, 6 for EU, 2 for NA, and 1 for China. This means it has the same system as a season finals, for example, but is more difficult since it doesn't give regional slots to weaker regions. Everyone has to fight their way through the open qualifiers and deserve their spot there. Let's start this off by taking a closer look at how exactly I qualified, because that in itself was quite the story. I played the qualifier on a Monday morning. Well, it was 12 PM, so it was noon, really, but that's a pro gamer morning. And I came off celebrating a friend's birthday on the weekend, and being happy that I qualified for TSL, which I did 2 days prior to that. I was not exactly in my best condition, but I signed up anyways and tried my best without too many expectations. The qualifier was seeded after EPT points, which usually means I will end up having to play one top player in Europe to qualify, since I have a high seed myself. This opponent ended up being HeroMarine this time. Now, even though I had beaten him in a couple of recent tournament encounters, he most certainly is a very difficult opponent when I'm completely sober. So this was gonna be an almost impossible task for my hangover self, or at least so I thought. We started the series off on Blackburn, which was always going to be the most difficult map for me to win in the best of 3. Game opened up with a Viking into Hellion drop, and I could smell the drop coming from a mile away. Being perfectly in position with my links, I ran away with all of them because of a 4 Hellion poke at my third base, and I panicked. In the end, I only ended up losing 6 drones to a 2-base build with an armory, which isn't too bad at all, but I can feel already how slow and inaccurate I'm playing. Just a minute later, I find myself supply blocked with 10 overlords on the way, which perfectly demonstrates this. As he shift clicks his Liberator directly into my Spore, I give him 2 queens back in the middle of the map for fair play points. HeroMarine then hit a relatively standard double medevac timing into my main base, and sadly my reaction time was as slow as a queen off creep trying to get back to his own hatch. I ended up losing 10 drones and a queen versus the first 2 medevacs. I recognized at this point that I was not gonna outplay HeroMarine in this series, and my plan instantly swapped to just all-inning him with Ling Bane on Blackburn. After I lost every single worker at my gold base, with another reaction time masterpiece, I just knew I had to go. Instead of attacking directly, I went through the top side of the map and then just A-moved without realizing my links just took a huge detour for no reason, because HeroMarine had his base completely walled. But that accident made it so HeroMarine was completely out of position. I killed 33 SCVs, which almost accidentally brought myself back, but I played too poor overall to really make something happen out of that, and I had to give him the first map. Now, if you don't get the idea yet, I was not exactly playing on my A game. This was the kind of replay that you could show a kid that really understands StarCraft very well, and you can use it to explain the negative effects of alcohol. So slowly, if you want, I can forward you the replay. Either way, my confidence was even lower than when I signed up, but it was thankfully just a best of 3, so I figured let's just see what the next maps bring. Hardwire was up next, one of the maps which I usually manage to survive relatively easily against Gabe and play my standard late game off 100 drones. But after watching that first game, to no one's surprise, things didn't quite go that smoothly. HeroMarine opened with a 3cc 4 Hellion Viking into bio build. That's a build that gives you pretty nice map control, but it isn't really supposed to deal damage other than forcing links early-ish for the first 2 medevacs. Well, the first 2 medevacs arrived in my main once again, on a map with a much higher rush distance than Blackburn, and I instantly lost 18 drones and a bunch of links due to a poor rally into my main base, and just simply not defending the Hellions. This usually is game-ending damage, no matter if I'm playing my best or not, especially against Gabe. And if this was a ladder game, I would have probably left at this point. Down in supply, upgrades, and pretty much everything else, I just tried to drone up to a reasonable drone count and somehow get back into the game by just defending. This is where Gabe did a first pretty big mistake to even just let me have a chance at this game, losing most of his marines, his tank and the medevac on my side of the map to just a bunch of Ling Bane. I finally felt some space to drone and tack up a little, but with the speed that I was playing I couldn't even get up a 5th base. Not only that, but Gabe was out multitasking me with only 2 prongs, something that should really be impossible on this high of a level. I found myself losing 29 more drones and being down 60 supply on 4 base against a Terran that has 5 CCs himself. I would have left this game any day of the week, but for some reason I stayed in this one. I don't really know if I was just too hangover to care if I get completely styled on by a streamer, which HeroMarine did have a stream open, or if I just figured I'd go back to bed anyways after knowing my usual hangover procedure. But something made me stay in this game, and I can't thank that instinct enough. I figured if I only can get out a bunch of lurkers, maybe I will end up getting to the 100 drone count after all. I knew it was always going to be a mountain to climb, but I stayed in and gave it my all. I got out 24 lurkers before my 5th base even finished, and I could get my drone count back up to the decent standards. I knew I was playing like a snail, so I decided to give up on creep spread altogether in that game and focus on turning this game around on the Terran side of the map. I split my army in half, started running through HeroMarine sensor towers with 12 of my lurkers, knowing his ghosts were out of position. I started to split them up and siege his planetaries while also pouncing on his main army. And it worked like a charm. HeroMarine, who skipped tanks entirely in favor of Liberators because he had map control, had none of them in position to actually shoot at my lurkers. Wherever he looked, there were spines shooting at him from underground, and he couldn't turn off the fires everywhere quick enough. By the time he cleaned up most of the lurkers, he lost 40 SCVs, a planetary, a sensor tower, and big parts of his army. With the game completely turned on its head, I finally got my drone count to where I wanted it to be, and continued with multiprong. After killing off 47 more workers and having an untouched economy at home, HeroMarine was forced to tap out eventually, and I pulled off one of the biggest comebacks of my career. There was one game remaining, and I noticed a trend of greedy openers being used by Gabe, so I won the deciders with a simple roach Ravager Ling all-in, where I circumvented his Hellions with my initial roaches to close out the series, and somehow I made it into the tournament. So let's fast forward a month. The tournament started, and first up was the group stage. I got placed into Group C. It consisted of Serral, Rogue, Special, and myself. This meant that I ended up in the same group with the most recent GSL Super Tournament winner, the most recent DreamHack Europe winner, and the most recent DreamHack Latin America winner. Not an easy group whatsoever, and a group in which I'm pretty sure 99% of the people would have predicted Serral and Rogue to advance out of. My first series was up against Rogue, who had a lot of ZVZs to study from. He plays similarly to me, which means that he pretty much plays everything from macro to all-ins in the matchup. But I've noticed a couple of trends. The series started out on 2000 atmospheres, on which I was sure he would edge first. And upon seeing that he doesn't know how to 13-12 himself, and a recent replay of Dark 12-11ing him, I knew he was going to sack the hatchery and thus give me an advantage out of the early game. After everything working out as intended, besides me making 5 extra banes instead of 1, due to a combination of a high repeat rate and US West ping, I ended up in a good position until I got blindsided by a 6 baneling run by that I completely missed on the minimap. I lost my economic advantage at an instant, which made playing the game versus Mutas practically impossible. So even though my 3rd base was much earlier than his, I ended up losing quite hard. Game 2 was on Blackburn, and I expected a gold versus gold duel, with mostly Ling Bane, which was exactly what happened. I watched his game against Scarlet, and he didn't look very experienced in the gold versus gold scenario. Equipped with a safety spine on my own gold, and a slight ping advantage to US Central, I managed to get a quick 1-1 on the board after wiping out most of the drones on his gold base. From there, we went to Curious Minds, where he opened up with a safety pool first, and I, as a response, went for a 2-base build with 4 queens. He tried to surprise me with a zergling attack, expecting me to not have a full wall because he circumvented my overlord and delayed his own 3rd base. But I've seen enough Korean ZVZ to know when to not cut corners, and I ended up really far ahead. As Koreans always tend to do after making a bunch of links, he followed it up with a +1 carapace Ravager Ling all-in. All that was left for me to do was get up my own carapace and mass roaches to defend his incoming attack. After clicking on his zerglings and verifying that he did in fact go for +1 carapace, I realized the best course of action was to gift him 3 high energy queens in the middle of the map to tilt him further when he eventually loses the game anyways, so I hopefully won't have to play against him in the rematch later on down the line. As you can see, I defended the attack relatively easily because I left enough space behind my roaches to dodge the bites while still walling out most of the lings, and I had a carapace upgrade on my own. Knowing the game was over, I just counterattacked instead of the more recommended way of waiting for +2 to finish, and finished the game. This meant I beat the player Artosis probably thinks could beat me one-handed, and my reward was getting to face the most difficult ZVZ opponent, at least for myself, Serral, in the winner's match. Now, as most of you know, my matches 3 versus Yona doesn't exactly look great for me, to say the least, but I did get the better of him on the mind game side of things many times in our duels in 2021, so winning a best of 3 against him shouldn't be absolutely impossible. We started out on Berlingrad, where I managed to get a builder advantage with a 2-base fake lair into link pressure. At this point in the video, I'd like to explain 2-base openers in ZVZ a little bit. The main idea behind a 2-base opener is to deny the scouting of your opponent entirely to the point where it's going to be very hard for them to be ready for everything perfectly. There are a ton of different variations, and the more of those you're able to play, the more powerful the 2-base becomes. That being said, if your opponent guesses the opener you are doing correctly or just blindly counters what you're doing with the way he's balancing drones and army units, the 3-base player will always end up ahead. So a lot of mind games are involved between knowing what your opponent's tendencies are to what worked for them and what worked for you in recent histories. Taking all that into consideration, you end up with options that you think will give you the edge. In this case, Serral skipped the link speed, which is good against every single non-link speed pressure variation, but it gets you behind against all the link speed ones. And thus in game 1, I had a builder win. Game 2 story was quite different. Serral started with a pressure that didn't really do a whole lot. I've remembered that he always played relatively safe in the past as a follow-up to those builds, and that I oftentimes all-in'd him after holding them. So the perfect choice in that game for me was to go into Mutas. The Mutas gave me perfect map control and a huge lead headed into the late game stage. Up multiple bases and equipped with an already better army composition, all I had to do was trade evenly and eventually starve him out. And it really looked like I was gonna be able to do that. He was out of gas and almost out of Vipers for a good portion of the game while still struggling to keep up with my base count. But eventually, over time, the focus started slipping and he never relented with his counter-aggression and staying safe behind his walls of spore crawlers, and I ended up losing a game that I had in the back after a 29-minute slugfest on Glittering Ashes. After that game, he decided to not play against my mind games and just started with a 2-base against my own 2-base himself, which is a strong option if your goal is to get to the mid-game safely. I ended up feeling forced into a +1 carapace all-in after I initially decided for the build with an Evo in my main before I knew he wasn't gonna take a 3rd base himself, and thus got hard countered in game number 3 by his very safe 2-base Muta Roach opener. Now most of you probably thought I'd get a rematch against Rogue in the Cyrus match, but Rogue apparently got drunk the night after his ZVZs in the Super Tournament against Stark and his match against me, and after starting off the series by telling Special that he's hangover, Huan just basically slapped him down 2-0. So my opponent was Special. TVZ is probably my most solid matchup on the ladder and in practice, but it is the matchup that I perform the worst in tournaments. That being said, I still went in with high confidence that all I had to do was survive till my late game, so I played the safest I could in both games and won the series 2-0 by going Lurkers in the first game and holding an 8-Rex in the second one. This meant that I found myself in the top 8 playoff stage of the tournament. Since I finished second, it meant I could only face the first place finishers of the other groups, but with the strongest opponent coming out of my own group and thus being impossible for me to get, I didn't really mind that all too much. My first opponent was Zaun. I knew very well how he liked to play, and I had multiple strategies ready to exploit his 2 Stargate into Void Ray Disruptor Archon style. But it never really got to that. On the first map, I noticed his Nexus was a tad late, and I checked for extra warpins that confirmed my initial suspicion of it being a glaive attack. With Roaches ready for the Adepts and Queens waiting to march, I launched a counterattack that easily overwhelmed him for a quick 1-0. And things didn't really slow down, as he tried to punish my gold first with a 6-gate Adept that once again got deflected with relative ease, which meant I once more had nothing else to do but counterattack with a superior Roach army to bag in the 2-0. The third game was once again relatively simple. since I realized something was off the moment he tried to take his third. I started safety roach production at around 60 drones, figuring it would either be an adept or a charge shot all in, which it ended up being. With good positioning in both my mineral line as well as the ramp, I ended up with a clean 3-0 based off reading my opponent, defending his attacks to the best of my ability, and then finishing the games with a lead that followed the defense. I was now in the semifinals, which meant I was in the top 4 of an international event. It's always crazy to me how it feels like all it takes is a little bit of bracket luck or a good day, and anyone can make these in 16-player single elimination formats. It's only winning 3 series after all, so it honestly didn't feel special whatsoever yet for me. My semifinals opponent was Dark, so the first thing I did was rewatch all the games he played with Rogue, in which I focused mainly on Rogue for the group stage games, but this time I looked at it from Dark's perspective. They play basically every tournament, which makes preparing a ZVZ series against them a lot easier. Equipped with the knowledge of how my opponent likes to play, I felt ready to take him on. The series started off on Hardwire, on which I went for a 13-12. I decided to change the build a little bit because it seemed like Koreans just sacrifice their base and go for a Baning Nest and a Spinecrawler in the main base, so I stopped mining gas after having enough for just the 2 Banings to cancel the hatchery. I went for it on Hardwire because I wanted to make sure he can't 12-pull me on the map. I do it on even though Hardwire is worse in itself for 13-12 due to the rush distance. His response was by far better than the last one I saw from his VODs, which meant he probably put some thought into it. But it barely was not enough to save the hatch, which gave me an advantage similarly to the game against Rogue. His follow-up after losing the hatch was a very heavy Ling Bane aggression that ended up killing my third base and doing some drone damage. But by the time he attacked me, I already was up 13 drones, which meant that I outmined him enough to go for a successful +1 carapace all-in on my own. Even though he stayed on a perfect drone count, he was a little too far behind to defend the attack. Game 2 was on Glittering Ashes, and Dark once again went for something he liked doing in a lot of the games I watched in preparation. A very committed Ling Bane pressure designed to kill the third hatch and a bunch of drones. I defended the initial pressure with little to no losses, but the second wave that hit me with a big number of banelings surprised me. My queens at the third base went down because they were slightly out of position, which made everything very hectic. In the chaos, a lot of my units ran into the fight without being hotkeyed. One of the biggest difficulties of playing on an A is units ending up unhotkeyed because I'm not slowing down enough for the ping. This showed in the defense quite a bit. Even though I had enough drones to suck the third hatch, I tried holding it anyways, and because of it, lost 8 drones, which meant that I not only lost the hatch, but also fell to his worker count, and from there he closed it out with a 2 gas all-in. Game 3 was on Berlingrad. Here I opened with pull first 2 base build. This was not only to be safe against the 12 pull, but mostly because I anticipated Dark going for a quick Baning Nest with full gas mining plus 3 queens, which the 2 base follow-up matches up very well against. He decided to pressure and sacrifice his safety links for 2 queens. Here I tried to exhibit the new glitch that I found to be useful at holding these attacks, but it didn't quite work because I had the queens not entirely stuck in between the 2 evos, which meant that I lost both my queens. At this point in the video I want to demonstrate the bug that I'm talking about real quick, because I'm sure some of you guys might not quite be aware, since it's something relatively newly discovered by Reddit and I don't think any pro gamer has used it yet. So the most useful situation that I found for it was actually exactly when I played 2 base and I got link flooded. And if a queen is stuck, so let's just pretend these are zerglings that are attacking the queen here, and the queen is about to die, what you can do is move command the queen on one of your other units and then push it back with the other one so that you have a new queen to tank. So whenever there is no space for the queen to move and you move command it on something else, the unit collision for some reason doesn't work. And that's what I tried to do against Dark, but I kind of failed at doing it. So in the end I didn't quite get the trick done and I lost my queens. Anyways, let's continue with the video. After all was done, I was still in a pretty good spot because of the amount of zerglings that Dark made. Now my plan was to scout with an Overseer and go Roach Mute against him because it blind counters the +1 carapace all-in that he loves doing against 2 base. Since I lost 2 queens and had to cancel my third ones, I decided to skip the Overseer and get out a couple of extra units early on to secure my third base, which ended up backfiring immensely. Dark had a worse early game than I anticipated, and his move out was way later than I've ever seen it before. It was so late that I already went back into droning, thinking that time had passed, and I got completely blindsided by it. So from an absolute build order win, I ended up losing because I tried to skip the Overseer scout for more perfect play. Something that I instantly regretted. Now visibly frustrated with myself because I gave away a free win, I went into game 4 with no lives remaining. I had to win the last 2 maps in a row. On Pride, I decided to go for a gold first because it seemed like he just opens with a normal hatch first. The gold base on Pride has 8 mineral patches and is very easy to defend to the point where I consider it a complete build order win. I knew he was going to go for a heavy link Bane pressure, so I had my gold base walled and made an extra queen for defense. I even checked for the Banes that would come from the bottom side of the map and was mentally prepared for Banes running at my gold base from all sides. But knowing what's coming and reacting correctly are two entirely different things in StarCraft, and with so many Banelings running at me, I didn't manage to trade my Banes with his well enough, which meant a bunch of them got through to my mineral line. It was a disaster. I thought this was where my run will end, having predicted everything Dark was gonna do in the entire series up to this point and still falling to him with a 1-3 loss. It was not gonna be a good feeling. I knew my only chance to win was with the last all-in. I decided to give it everything and ran across the map with the 2 queens from my gold base, being down 20 workers and barely even in supply. I don't think many people believed, but I managed to split away perfectly from his Banelings and take a great fight with my Zerglings to surround most of his units that he tried to hold the third base with. And with barely enough units left, and still behind in supply, I ran up the natural ramp and managed to force Dark to tab out. At this point, even though I did not feel like I played very well, I was only a single map away from the grand finals. I quickly recollected my thoughts to what I wanted to do with 2 plans. One against gold first, and one against the normal hatch first, because we were headed to Blackburn. He decided to go with a blue base at first, and then a gold base as his third hatch, since I was going to base myself. This time around I played the same build I did on Berlingrad a couple matches prior to this, but this game you can bet your ass that I wouldn't skip the goddamn Overseer Scout. With him going for the same attack once again, I was more than prepared this time around and cleaned up most of his units. At this point, all I had to do was deny his gold base till my 2-1 upgrades finish and attack to punch in my ticket to the finals. I felt happy and all, but I mostly felt relief, and that felt great. I didn't think I played a good series, to be honest, but with good preparation and understanding of the matchup, that was not necessary. I never thought about EPT points or prize money during any part of the series of the tournament. But this finals meant that I actually got ahead of Showtime in the race for Katowice, which was something that I gave up on after M-Lord gifted him the top 3 in the last DreamHack of the year. This was the first time I ever got to a grand finals of an international tournament. I was a map away in the winners finals of Home Story Cup, and I almost got to the finals of 2 WCS events and 1 DreamHack Europe. I never actually was there, having to prepare and play a best of 7 though. This was new territory for me and one that I've been looking forward to for a long time now. And the only player standing between me and my first trophy ever was none other than my nemesis. The guy you have to beat if you want to win anything outside of Korea, the Finnish phenom himself, Serral. I think on paper I know I shouldn't beat Serral in a best of 7, but late into a tournament with momentum in play, anything can happen, and I knew that from my past runs, whenever I got far into tournaments, I never bombed out against anyone, and always had a close series against Serral as well. As it turned out, this one would not be any different either. I thought about this series the entire day, from me laying in bed before sleeping to laying in bed waking up, in the shower or while eating breakfast. I thought of what he thought I was gonna do and how I would play to that image. The time finally came and the series started on Hardwire. As Jonas' map pick, and probably the map he feels the most confident on, I prepared a 12-11 that I only ever showed once against Rainer in a random qualifier event. It worked well in practice, and I knew that if he knows the exact response, he'd hold it. But this version is really uncommon, so I hoped he wouldn't find the right defense on the fly. Sadly for me, he did exactly that and held it perfectly. 1-0 for him, on to my map pick, Curious Minds. Here I decided to just play standard, because I had a feeling he'd be aggressive. In the past, this had been one of his weakest maps because of the short rush distance and great offensive concaves. It is extremely hard to play reactive on this map. So I figured he'd take the initiative, and he did exactly that. I held his Link Bane aggression without any issues, but that was not the end of his plan. He went for a +1 carapace all-in, where you hide all your units you build behind the wall to the last possible moment and then overrun your opponent. I had drone till 60, but built roaches after that, and even though my upgrades didn't finish, with good micro on the defense and sacrificing all the drones from my third base, I managed to fight his attack back. With roach speed being done, I could counterattack and tie up the series. Next up was 2K Atmospheres, where I had the exact build plan that he just did to me. The only difference is that I did it without the initial pressure. This build is supposed to be impossible to scout, and with many drones fake transferring one at a time to look like I'm naturally producing them, I got ready to pounce. He was not ready, and since I expanded towards his base, his spines did not have enough time to finish. It looked like he didn't have enough units, but I got overeager and chased his roaches into his natural. That mistake cost me dearly, as I could have droned up with a lair and won one on the way while settling for his third base and potentially his wall afterwards. Instead, he managed to clear up my army and close out the game for a 2-1 advantage. Back to my map pick with another short map, Burningrad. Here I went for a 13-12. I was fairly certain Serral also just sacrifices his natural, especially on a short map, which once again gave me the lead, similar to my series against Dark and Rogue. At this point I just want to shout out Denver, who I copied the build from. Even though I changed it a bit, it still is the build that he beat me with in DreamHack, so shout out to Denver for that. Similarly, no top player knows the correct response to this, which is very amusing. Denver even getting ahead against players like Rainer and the Laser with it as well. Serral wanted to go for a 2-gas Roachelin initially as a follow-up to sacrificing his natural, but I got my Lingen for a scout. The moment I scouted it, I was 99% sure he would cancel it and make a lair, so I decided to go for a 2-base lair myself. On a map this short, I felt comfortable going for a Roach Queen initially against Muta. I confirmed my suspicion with a slight pressure to cancel his third while leaving a lot of units at home to defend my own third. I considered nidusing, or even just walking drones across the map and making spores with them, but I figured I'd just play from a slight lead instead. I ended up not taking any damage to the initial Mutas, and my plan was to force them back with burrow movement while amassing a Roach, Hydra and Faster force, and then hit a deadly timing. I sacrificed my first round of burrow movement roaches for a lot of time and 10 drones, a trade well worth it. Serral, realizing he's a little behind, tried to go for a pseudo ninja base, which my burrowed roaches also found relatively quickly. The biggest complication was me being out of position for a small baneling run by that ended up killing 17 workers, which meant I now was relatively committed with less reinforcements than usual. With good funnels and a microbial shroud, I managed to take a very good trade. I made a big mistake of not running into the main base with my roaches during the fight, but my army lead was enough to close out the game a little while later. With the series being tied up once again, we were back to a big map in Glittering Ashes, the map I threw against him in the group stage. Remembering back that game, I figured he'd probably play pretty standard against me on it. My plan was something I haven't practiced even a single time beforehand, but I thought in theory must be extremely powerful against the way he responds to Roach Muta. Serral usually goes for Roach, Infestor into Hive against Roach Muta, with the upside of it being able to commit overcommitted Roach attacks, but the huge downside of it not being able to move out for practically ever, since he doesn't have mobile anti-air. My strategy was clear. I wanted to get the Mutas up and then maximize my gas mining and hit with the fastest possible upgraded lurker timing, all while denying his scouting preferably. I tried to make it as hard for him to guess if I was playing Mutaling Bane or Roach Muta. Little did he know it was neither. By the time he scouted the 2 lurker dance, it was already too late. His Queen, Roach, Ravager and Faster army stood no chance. Even though I didn't need to kill him, being on 10 gas myself, I could just dive into his third base and do exactly that, putting me on match point. The 2 maps remaining are Serral's least favorite ones. The maps where ZVZ actually becomes random because they have a gold base. Up first was Pride of Altaris. This map, I was the most uncertain of what strategy I was gonna play. I knew he thought I would open up with a gold first, but figured he knew that I would know that he knows. I think of Serral as a very smart player, and usually he tries to not take too many risks, especially when he's facing elimination. That being said, I was sure he would go with whatever he had planned, especially on the gold base maps. I took everything into consideration and talked with Scarlet a lot about it. I thought the most likely thing he would do prior to the series was to 12 pull around my overlords toward the gold base. The second most likely option I thought was that he would gold first himself. I considered taking gold first with a gas pool opener, going normal gold first myself, or opening up with a blue base. The question was really just what percentage I give these matchups of builds. I actually, up until I played against him on Pride, thought that gold first does not fall behind against the 12 pool if you don't pull the drones right away. And since I believe blue first and gas pool gold are both a build or loss against gold first from his side, I ended up going with the hatch first on my gold. The game started and he went for exactly what I thought he would do, a 12 pull avoiding the last overlord pattern I showed. I actually specifically changed my overlord pattern for this 12 pool, but in practice my opponents always went through the right, but then through the center, so my overlord was slightly off, which was a little annoying. If I didn't gold first, his plan was probably to attack my natural with a spine, which I would have loved to see how that would have went. Either way, the reason why I thought gold first was not that bad against 12 pool is because the links need to waste a lot of time killing the gold base while you already get up your real natural hatch, which is great for the defender. The hatch at the gold also gives you 2 larvae before it dies, which comes in very handy in this situation. One thing that I never thought would give me trouble though was the fact that Serral made more links than I've ever seen anyone make. He didn't stop at the usual 10, but made 14 zerglings instead. So I underestimated his links at my natural and didn't pull enough drones soon enough. I ended up losing my hatchery, which meant I felt far behind. Since I knew I was gonna float money from the lack of larvae, I instantly double expanded with a gold base to try and come back into this. On top of that, I knew, since he saved up a lot of links, he would try to use them with a late link speed strategy. I hoped he would go for a link speed pressure, and I wanted to go for a massive 1-1 link counterattack if that was the case, overwhelming his potential roach link defense at his third base. At this point I was gambling because I knew I was behind. He indeed ended up wanting to put his zerglings to good use, but he had banes ready, which meant I had to try and counterattack. And even though my counterattack did great, I didn't manage to hold on my side with the walls and queens and zerglings, and I had to tab out. The score of the grand finals was now 3-3. The next map will decide if I finally know how it feels to win something important for the first time in my entire career, or if Yona wins his 69th trophy to add to his collection. The map was Blackburn, once again ready with 2 potential strategies, similarly to my series against Dark, depending on him opening with gold first or blue first. I felt ready to take him on. The game started and he opened with a gold first, while I went for a blue base myself. I saw experts on the forums talk about him winning the mind games or the strategy games or whatever, which couldn't really be further from the truth. I still had a strategy up my sleeves that I had prepared for Dark if he opened for the gold first approach, but I didn't get to show. The gold base on Blackburn only has 6 patches, which means it is not that much superior to a normal base. On top of that, the way you usually defend Link Banolins off of a fake 2-base layer build is with walls at your natural, which is obviously not possible if your hatch is in the middle of the map. Exploiting that fact was the first step to my strategy. Making atypical 2 Zerglings on 2-base and hiding them meant that he had to prepare for the eventuality of a Baning bust. Yona, being the safe player that he is, finished his Baning nest and made early Zerglings because of it. This was important for the rest of the build to work. Since he made a lot of safety links, I knew he was going to open with a +1 carapace afterwards to hold any potential +1 roach aggression. This is why I went for a +1 carapace on my own, even though I had planned on making roaches for the rest of the game. I got 1 more queen than usual and started pumping out roaches. With overlords spreading creep in the middle of the ramp, I now closed the gate to his gold base mining entirely. The best thing that could have happened is Serral trying to defend the mining and engage me in the middle of the map. He, however, did not fall for that, and instead kept making units and playing it safe. I also hoped, upon realizing that he won't ever mine from his gold base again, he would start up a 4th base, which would mean an extra hit for his roach production. Either way, with 2 full energy queens and 46 roaches versus 25, I attacked right as my 1-1 finished. This was going to be the one fight that will decide the outcome of the entire tournament. The fight started off with my queens on move command for an to me unknown reason, which meant they ran to the front of the fight. They had 7 transfuses saved up between the 2 of them, so that was a massive mistake. I know also messed up my concave momentarily, and the Ravager ran to the front of the battle. Even with these mistakes, I tried my best to stay in a concave and focus Ravagers and dodging bites wherever I could. Towards the end of this tournament deciding fight, it looked as if I had enough roaches to fulfill my dream and win a StarCraft 2 tournament, so I stepped forward to try and take out his last Ravagers. In doing so, I move commanded forward, low HP roaches, straight into my own corrosive bites, and the fight instantly turned around. With still more roaches on the map, but a much longer reinforcement path, Serral managed to fight me back and kill many of my important units on the way there. My heart sank instantly because I knew he could just resaturate his gold base and there was nothing I could do about it. I knew the game was over on paper. With the numbers still looking competitive, in hindsight, it was not nearly as over as I felt in that moment, but my position felt hopeless. I hoped that if I could at least max out, I could maybe find a fight to come back into the game, so that's what I tried to do. I started coping with the fact that I will have lost the series and thus the tournament, being inches away from tasting victory. The game just really played in the background when my thoughts were already past it. A couple of Roach Ravager engagements later, and I just ended up dead because he outmined me. I called GG and Serral won a well-deserved title. I myself felt crushed. All the positive feelings of relief and happiness that I had after the Dark Series were gone and instantly overshadowed by anger, sadness, but more than anything, regret. What if I didn't overcommit into his natural on 2000 atmospheres? What if I just went for a hatch first on natural on Pride? What if I just microed my attack like I know I'm capable of on Blackburn? Was this gonna be my only chance at a tournament win ever? Those were some of the most piercing thoughts. What I did was instantly jump on my bed with my face pressed hard against my pillow. Eventually I decided to go on a walk shortly after to do what I always do if unhealthy feelings pop up. I rationalized my feelings relatively fast and figured things like my life won't change anyways, and all of those negative thoughts were just counterproductive more than anything. But the moment I got back home and sat down in front of my PC, these exact thoughts snuck up on me again and stayed with me. It felt considerably worse than the DreamHack loss versus Denver, for example. Now a month later, I still see things very similarly. I shouldn't really feel bad about the performance that is supposed to be my best tournament run ever, but I also can't get myself to feel too happy about it. One of the biggest reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is that I'm chasing the feeling of success. And a big part of that is trying to experience the feeling of winning a tournament. If I'm being honest with you guys, I even had a hard time simply rewatching the games that I played against Serral, specifically the ones on 2000 atmospheres and on Blackburn while I was editing this video. Many people wrote super nice things to me on Twitter and Discord and said stuff like, you should be proud of your run and it was a great run and you'll maybe win a tournament soon, but as a very realistic person, I'm not quite sure if I believe them. My career has been quite long and this is the very first grand finals I've ever been to. And it wasn't really because I got a lot better all of a sudden. It's not like my skill has risen out of nowhere and that's why I got that run. I just happened to finally get a tournament run where I had to face Korean Zergs on Korean Protoss consecutively. And on top of that, I don't really get to participate in many of those round of 16 tournaments where you only really need to win a couple of series to get very far into them. I always knew that I was capable of having a run like this because it relies very heavily on my biggest skill, which is the skill of preparation, especially in this next tournament because the games were sometimes even weeks apart from each other. And sadly, I don't really get that many opportunities to show off that skill because I'm simply not solid enough to always qualify for these types of tournaments. And whenever I do, a top Terran can simply force me into a mechanical match, and very often I end up losing to players like Cure or Amaru. Those are very, very difficult for me to beat. In the end, despite how I feel about this entire run, it is crazy to think about that I went from basically being 0-2'd in the qualifier while being hangover to almost beating 3 of the best players in the world and winning the entire thing. One less mistake, and I could have won the finals, sure, but one more mistake or a different mood and I would have left game 2 against HeroMarine, and I would have never even been here to begin with. I'm making this video so you guys might learn a little bit more about me in general and what's going on in my mind during and after such a tournament. I want you guys to understand that I'm a hyper-competitive person at my core, and winning is the most important thing for me. Either way, I do hope that you guys also enjoyed this video format. It was a lot of work for me personally because I did actually write a script for the first time ever. I did write the script without watching the replays, so purely based off memory. And then afterwards, I went into the replays and started clipping the most important moment, and I started editing the entire thing for myself. One thing that I learned during this video is that I never want to edit a video like this again, so I hope to find someone that can help me out, at least for the special videos that take a little bit more effort to edit. So if you guys are interested in that, you guys can let me know in the comments. Likewise, if you guys enjoyed this video, you can let me know in the comments as well. For special occasions like these, I don't mind putting an extra hour or two into it and making an extra YouTube video. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go back to playing some StarCraft, getting ready for Katowice hopefully, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.